Hello and welcome to our paper scanning project cost webinar. I'm Will, and who I have with me is Jim Dietrich, one of our vice presidents and account executives that's the expert on paper scanning. Hello, Jim.
Hello, Will, and thank you. Morning,
That's
everybody.
why I wanted Jim on here today, because he knows much more about this than I do, and it'll be much more useful to all of you. So, quick intro, that's us. We'll get right into it. First things first, some house cleaning items as always. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand using the Zoom toolbox feature, just so I know that you can hear me and hear Jim. Just if someone can raise their hand, I saw one hand, two hands, perfect, that means it's working. And if you think you can click it again to put it down, because I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you can see our screen. You should see a video of me and Jim, as well as the screen that says nuts and bolts. I have a raised hand. Excellent. Two raised hands. We're good. So you are muted. You're not on video, so don't worry about that or being seen or people seeing your name. No one can see. But if you do have a question for us, use the Q&A tool within the Zoom toolbox. We'll try to answer it as they come in. However, if we don't see them or we're just kind of on a roll, we have time at the end for questions. But please use the Q&A tool for any comments or questions. We'll get to those at the end for sure. Ask them along the way, though, and if we see them, we'll try to answer them as we see them. All right. So the purpose of today's webinar is, one, to define paper scanning as we see it and how we think most of our clients see it, and then the scope of what we're going to go over. We're going to illustrate the 7 cost factors of paper scanning. They're basic factors that we've come up with that apply to almost every project. And then leave you with a benchmark for a project cost. We're not going to have exact numbers for you. That really depends on your individual circumstances, your project, your scope, but you'll at least have a general idea of a baseline and if you're going to probably be above that or below that baseline. The first up is, what is paper scanning? And our interpretation is converting hard copy paper records to a digital format. That should be what you're thinking of when you think of scanning and conversion or digitization. Those are all not euphemisms, synonyms, I think is the right word. They all mean the same thing. You might hear them thrown around differently. Digitalization, things of that sort. It's just getting your hard copy records into an electronic format. It can be office-sized documents, small format, large format, like engineering drawings, or just giant like blueprints, things of that sort. What they call like well logs, oversized documents like that, books, photos, and so forth. And today's focus is purely, though, going to be on the small and large format. So office-sized documents and things like building department plans or planning department plan sets, things of that sort. We're not going to go into these specialty items on this webinar. Jim, anything to add on this intro slide?
No, I don't think so, Will. Nothing much. The books and photos, books in particular, we do consider specialty. They're scanned using a different method, typically, which is a non-destructive scanning method. That's an overhead scanner that we use to capture book pages without destroying the binding. So that is kind of its own sort of specialty.
Yeah. And just because you said it, the overhead, like newsprint, that I guess you could go through an oversized, we call it high-speed scanner, but typically those are done using overhead. So we're not talking about those in particular today, but those are types of paper scanning. We're going to focus on the most common, which is just the bulk office-sized documents, plan sets, things of that sort. So what we have here, same title here, what's paper scanning, but here's going to be some images of those types of materials. And Jim, you can talk about these as we go along as well. I think we have 4 of them.
Yeah, sure. That's obviously a box of binders, which is somewhat atypical. We don't have many clients that will submit binders with records, but certainly we do come upon them within some jobs. There can be what we call a mixed format job that has some binders mixed with file folders and whatnot. So that's a great picture of one that's all binders. Next picture that Will just brought up there is a card catalog. Probably familiar with those if you've used card catalogs in libraries in the past, which
libraries have them. We've seen them at like in registrars' offices, so references to students and getting their files, or Actually, I've seen them in like county building departments, just references to other records, but yay size big card stock that we consider paper scanning.
Right. Next is just rolled plan sets. We do a lot of scanning for government agencies that take in rolled plan sets, building departments, public works, planning. So that's an example of those.
Now, these are as what we would have said is specialty. We wanted to show them just to get an idea, but these are oversized deeds. So they're, if I'm holding it, it's going to be like pretty big. They're big big materials. And one interesting thing is, like Jim mentioned, we would typically a lot of times do these on an overhead, but sometimes you have the ability to unbind these records. They're in like pins where you can take them out and actually use a high-speed scanner. Or some clients are okay with us what we call guillotining, so actually cutting the binding, which then can also be used for high-speed scanning. So there was kind of a gray area of, well, it's a book, it can't be scanned this way, or it has to be overhead. That's not always the case, but in most cases, it would be an overhead scanning because many folks want to keep the records in that historical context of it's a book. I want to look like that book when I see the image. So just a reference there. And then, of course, the goal of all these types over here is to get them into this type over here, which is an electronic image. All right, so before we go into the individual factors one by one, these are the 7 cost factors that we see in most projects. You have the quantity, the type, organization, indexing, output. All these will go into how your paper scanning project is priced and what's going to cost you. And the general pricing, so with a grain of salt, you're looking at roughly, now we're talking about banker's box. You have a banker's box of records, fairly clean. You have some folders, files, staples. There's some prep involved. Very ballpark number, about 175 to 300 per box, so per banker's box. That is very much going to depend on your specific materials, what your requirements are, the indexing, how difficult it is to separate the records and organize them once they're in digital. But that's a pretty good ballpark to start. You could call it 225 a box is just kind of a high level. Let me start there, and then these various cost factors that we're going to go over can kind of bump it up or bring it down a little bit for the overall project. Any comment on this one, Jim, before we get into the specifics that you can dive into?
I do not at this point. I just to emphasize that would be like a standard record storage box. Those are 15 inches deep, 12 inches wide, 12 inches high. We do have clients that submit what we like to call the backbreakers, but the 24-inch bankers boxes. They'll hold, obviously, another 9 inches worth of records. So they are considerably heavier and have quite a bit more documentation within them. So just bear that in mind.
Another term for those kind of oversized or larger boxes is a double wide. Even though they're more long, it's just the term is double wide. We hear that a lot. Anyway, moving on. Cost factor number 1, quantity. So how much do you have? And as Jim mentioned, there's the banker's box, the standard banker's box, but then you may have a larger banker's box. You may only know how much material you have based on, you have shelves of records and like those movable shelves. You don't have boxes, but you have those. That is a way to quantify. And then cabinets and drawers, and we'll show some pictures here of examples. So Jim, I'll click through a few here and you can describe what we're seeing and how to kind of estimate along the way.
Sure. This particular photograph was taken from an on-site visit just a couple of months ago. All of these boxes contain student records, and we often see this where there's an archive area, a cage of sorts, where the boxes are stored, typically one deep. These are actually the backbreakers. These are the double wide boxes that we'll refer to. So each one of these that you see is a double wide box, and they're shelved, and they had probably 10 shelving units full, just like that. Here's a palletized example. So some of our customers are storing either offsite or within their facility in their warehouse. They'll store the boxes on pallets in preparation to have them scanned or shipped. So this is an example of that. Typical pallet will hold about 40 boxes, 5 layers of 8 boxes each. This is a shelving unit. Some of you may be familiar with these for high density type of shelving storage of files. So these shelves roll. This is another on-site discovery picture that I took just a couple weeks ago. There are approximately 6 feet worth of files from front to back to the wall there, and 7 shelves per section within here, and there were 10 sections. So we encounter this quite a bit, and so these would all need to be transitioned to boxes for scanning. But lots of times we need to estimate volume by assessing a collection like this.
And a lot of times, at least if I was looking at this, and let's say I wasn't on site, and my client said, "Hey, we have 6 feet," I would take that, because a standard banker's box is 15 inches long, and you can fit those just, you know, front to back 15 inches worth. I'd take that 6 feet, divide it by the 15 inches to extrapolate. Okay, that's about, you know, roughly. Not doing the quick math here, but call it 4 to 5 boxes per, you know, shelf or per row, and then there are X number of rows. Okay, you probably have around 50 boxes or whatever that number is. But that's a quick way to do it. Jim, you may have a more accurate method, but that's, you know, a lot of times when you're starting these projects and just getting into a ballpark price, kind of an estimated quote to get that scope work, you are looking for high level numbers. 40 versus 42 boxes is almost irrelevant. It's more getting a general idea of where that price is going to be.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is these files in particular are legal size. Most of the time we're encountering letter size files. So when these are transitioned to boxes, they will occupy the box sideways. And so we'll get a foot of files instead of 15 inches. That will affect the number of boxes.
This one's a little blurry, but I think Jim can describe what we're seeing here.
Yeah, sorry about that. My picture taking. This is just an example of what we encounter occasionally, which are shelving units that have multiple formats worth of records. This one, these happen to be maintenance related records for a client. So they're kept in binders, some of them bound, some shelves full, some not, you know, so some stacked on top, as you can see. So this is where the estimating gets to be a little bit more challenging, because we have to figure out how full those 4-inch binders are. Do they contain 2 inches of documents or 4 inches worth? So on and so forth. So this is just, I think, a good way of illustrating. Sometimes you get kind of the mishmash of material types within one collection of records.
Yeah, I can get a little wonky because then, you know, let's say there are binders. You can still figure, all right, if you stick the binders in a box, you have, I don't know, call this top row about 4 boxes of binders of files. But then when you see little books down here and things, as I mentioned, you can guillotine those. You can turn them into loose leaf. But if you're not doing that, okay, well, I have 20 boxes here, but then these I'm gonna have to do on this other scanner over here, or I am cutting these and it's going to be this. It can get a little interesting, let's say. So this is very typical of clients. They say, here's some stuff, and then or Jim most of the time has to figure out how to get stuff processed.
It's magic. It's really
magic.
Lateral file cabinets. So there's really, most of you are probably familiar with 2 basic file cabinet styles. Most of the laterals will be 4 drawers, but this is a 5-drawer lateral where the width of the drawer is usually about 36 inches. And files can be stored in they're either front to back with multiple rolls or side to side. So when we are assessing collections like this, we measure the width, we look at how they're stored within, and again, we try to convert that to a how many boxes per drawer type of metric.
Our favorite unit, at least for estimating, is the banker's box, because everyone knows what that means. And actually, I don't know if we said it before, but a banker's box, if you didn't have any, you have some folders, but basically just loose leaf paper, you're roughly looking at about 2,400 to 2,500 pages in a banker's box, which is clean material. That will increase if you really stuff it. It'll decrease if you have more folders and or binders and things of that sort. But a good rough number is about 2,400 pages per box, standard banker's box. All right, type. So type refers to the data and the content, which is what's on the records. And the reason we want to know that and how it will affect your project is because depending on what you have on there, we actually have to run the projects different ways. And we have this material security classification level. So different projects require different processing methods. So a simple example would be, some sort of technical manuals. Maybe they're private to an organization, but there's no sensitive information on. There's no PII or personally identifiable information, anything that can identify a person. It's just it's like, or invoices or something like that. So hey, this company is paying us so and so dollars. This is where the company is. Nothing personal compared to like criminal files or medical files. That is a different material security level. So we actually process those differently. And the higher the security level, the more protection, auditing, more work it takes to set up that project and run it in a certain way compared to a lower level project. It's not to say that all the projects we run aren't protected in their own way, but certain projects require certain levels of security. Anything additional on that, Jim?
Only that we do spend some time working with clients on this determination, because it's not always clear to the customer what all of their files contain. So we need to be careful. We need to err towards being more secure than less, but determining if your content has PII or protected health information within it. It's a pretty key part of this discovery effort.
Yeah, agreed. File organization complexity. So how are the files actually organized within however we receive them? So here's some questions for that. Is it a simple file structure? Are there multiple, like if you have folders, is it a single manila folder where you open up and that one file is in that folder, or you open up that like a multi-section folder with the prongs on it, and you have all these different ways to break down the files? What are the bindings like? Is there a staple every other page where it's 2-page, lots paper clips, rubber bands, et cetera. The more complex that gets and the more kind of pieces to that organization, it makes it harder to prep the records for scanning, and that can typically bump up that price from the baseline. And here's some, I'll go through some pictures that Jim can describe.
Sure. This one I think was perfect for this webinar, because it just kind of fit right into the complexity discussion. This was from a recent discovery meeting where they had this particular file organization guide on the ends of all of the shelving units. And it kind of showed their progression over time, where initially when they were filing records, they were putting them in folders that had two sides, left and right, with prongs at the top. And then that progressed into 4 sides, 6 side, and 8 sides. So these aren't, their particular files aren't as simple as files can be, which would be to have no sides, just everything within a file. But it shows you from the left side, they put 2 or 3 different document types on the left, others on the right. And then as their process got more sophisticated, they started to increase that.
Okay, that's a good example there.
This is an example of a vertical file cabinet drawer that contains your standard manila file folders, letter size. They've got very legible, clear, and consistent labeling of the file folders. And this particular project, they're requiring only the key identifier for each file, which is the top value on each folder label, to be keyed in order to name PDF files for each of those file folders.
And something before I go to the next one on this specifically. So although the files or the folders themselves are simple, like Jim said, you open it up, you scan everything in there, and there may be paper clips, staples, bindings of some sort, but it's just one section. You can see that's, I don't know, roughly, call that a box of records, maybe 2 boxes worth once you open the whole drawer. That's a lot of touching. So a lot of files within that area. So although the complexity is small or minimal, it's just a lot of handling. And that does play into that preparation that I mentioned earlier, and cost is how long does it take to get this ready? So luckily the indexing is simple. There's not a lot of figuring out where something goes, but a lot of smaller pieces compared to if this was opened up and they were just let's say 6 big giant folders, just, chunk, 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 chunk. There's a lot of smaller ones. Something to keep in mind when you're, talking to a company about scanning, that will affect it as well.
All right, so this is a tub of, we don't see these very often, but some customers will store files in these plastic tubs in their warehouse. These are mixed format files. Not that you can't have mixed format within basically your standard business size records, in that you can have legal and letter size and check size. But this is, we define these as mixed format because one of the material types is small format up to 11 by 17, which can be scanned on one type of scanner. And we call it a rotary scanner. And then the other is large format, or oversized sheets, we sometimes call them, which are typically going to be anywhere, well, above 11 by 17. So engineering drawings or, building department, building plans are usually going to be 24 by 36, which is what you're seeing there. They're folded up, they have rubber bands around them. They need to be segregated during our processing to be scanned on a large format scanner. And so I think this is a great example of, we've got some stuff that is bound or within a binder of some kind on the right. We've got large format, small format, and all of them need to be tied together by some set of indexes so that they can be easily found.
Mm-hmm.
Just another example of binders mixed with file folders. Really, we see it in all shapes and sizes, and this is also a good illustration. Something I'll suggest if you're transitioning from file cabinets into boxes is it's always best to use a box that can accommodate the materials. Otherwise, palletizing and transporting them when you can't put the lid on and palletize can be challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a great example of what we internally and sometimes externally refer to as loose documents or loose docs. These came to us as a surprise, but this happens where we receive a bunch of boxes that have standard contents in file folders, and then we encounter something that the customer, one of their staff members, just decided to clear something out and accumulate them all in a single box. So this is a box of envelopes. The challenge here, as you can imagine, will be determining what you want to do if you even want to scan materials like this. If you want to scan them and create documents at the envelope level, or you want to create them at the box level, it really is going to depend. But looking at this, you can imagine organizing them in any particular way would be challenging for us as the vendor. So I thought it was worth showing.
Any salesperson, myself included, although I do minimal sales, anyone that's done a paper scanning project, it can be, I don't know, 50, 100 boxes stuff. It's like, great, that went well. It's all similar. Almost every time the client at the end of the project say, hey, I found something. Yep. And it's just tough to turn them down, even though it may be completely different. Like you may have like student records that are very clean, very put together, folder. Say, hey, can you help me out with this?
Yeah.
Try not to do this to your scanning partner, although it's probably going to happen just because everyone's seen it many times. There's always that last batch of things.
Yeah, unless it's a box of money.
Yeah. It's always there. Yeah, here's an interesting one too.
Yeah, similar. So I thought this is a good example. Sometimes we encounter boxes we receive. This is a lot of loose docs, but it's also got some other materials that were thrown in there, like CDs, which obviously we can't scan. We can photograph them, and they're labeled during the scanning process, but we cannot scan the CDs or tapes or slides on the same scanner that we're going to scan the paper. We do have film scanning capability. But I thought this is a good illustration of how sometimes a box can be a catch-all, and it's good to avoid that.
Yeah, like Jim mentions, we've done projects where there are a bunch of folders, but there might be one sheet of microfiche within each folder, or there are a couple rolls of film. knowing that beforehand helps us plan for it, although we can take care of that. Really matching things back when they're in separate rooms, separate scanners is difficult. But even in this case, like Jim said, if it's just, oh, we don't need, let's say our client says, we don't need the actual data, we just want to know that it was there because we've never touched it in 50 years, we can photograph that CD. Or if it's, what, I do want what's on there, we can typically get that information and then migrate it or transfer it to the final deliverable. But that is a whole nother can of worms because no one knows what's on there. Figuring that out, it's just a different thing, but it is possible. It's just something like Jim says, if we find it, we'll bring it up, mention it to you, say, hey, we found something, what do you want to do with this? Sometimes clients just say, just give it back to me, don't worry about it. That's a simple way also. All right, material condition, this is a fun one. So typically the three are good, fair, poor. Good is like, all right, this is nice. There's some prep, of course, you got to get them ready, but it's clean material. The pages aren't, copy stains or rips everywhere. It's just like, hey, this is nice stuff. Once we remove the bindings, take it out of its folders and so forth and so on. Fair would be pretty good. It's all right. There's some fixes here. There's some torn pages. We got tape. We got to do things of that sort. But overall, it's still not bad. Poor is where it just dogs down the prep is the key thing. Scanning projects, I'll kind of go back to the beginning. We call them scanning projects, but they're really prep and indexing projects. Because you can imagine if you gave Jim a ream of paper, just printer paper, it's clean, nice, already stacked, nothing in it. Anyone could just put that on a scanner, just blast, 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 blast. It just goes really quick. But paper doesn't come like that with these projects. You have to prep it, which takes a lot of manual labor to get these materials prepared to cleanly go through a scanner. And then once it is digitized, organizing it after the fact, which we'll get to. I think that's the next a couple steps here. So the material condition really goes into that prep, and then sometimes it does affect the actual scanning because maybe it's just too fragile to go through. It's just really poor. If we scan it, maybe there could be an issue like, hey, there may be it may have a problem going through the scanner itself, or there may be some discussion about we'll try this, but you're okay if something happens to it because it's just such poor material. So those are the conditions. There's some pictures here that'll illustrate some of this.
Good.
Good paper.
That's the definition of good paper. This happens to be a box level scanning job, but this is an example of documents that are in very good condition. Here's the opposite end of the spectrum. So this project was never entertained by the customer, but this was our first stop during the discovery call, and nobody wanted to try to step in this metal storage container. And you can imagine what we might find in there, but there was water damage to the documents. It's not clear, really. In some cases, they've fallen over, documents have spilled out. So hopefully none of you have your records stored in this manner, but that's probably the almost a worst case scenario, I think. And here is an example of a document that could come out of a job maybe where we would consider it to be fair if we gave the condition or report card, where a lot of the documents are very scannable, will produce acceptable images, but there are occasional older pages that are on onion skin or old fax paper where there's a burn-in process that has happened or something has happened, and to capture that that image of that page is quite challenging. This is where we might consider scanning in grayscale or scanning in color to see if it would produce something acceptable.
Jim, can you describe onion skin?
Onion skin is the old paper, very old style paper, very thin, almost transparent, like you're peeling away an onion that they used to type on decades ago. We still encounter it in some older files because some of the organizations we work with have archived files for decades. Their materials go back into the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Thank you. And then I have a question here. I'm just going to pop this up. The question is, when you receive CDs, tapes, etc., do you open and import them into your repository? My version of that answer would be, we could. I believe when you say our repository, we have our platform called Digital Reel. We have done that for folks. I've done that personally on some projects where I've I did microfiche and then plan sets, and then my client said, hey, I have some already digital records that I want you to put into your system because everything else is going there. That is possible. It just depends on when we find these. Is that part of the project? Is that part of the scope of work we discussed? Or is it an addition, kind of an add-on at the end? But it is possible. I think that's the answer. Jim, would you have any other?
I don't. I totally agree. I think it's kind of a case by case basis. And I've certainly had similar projects. Yeah.
I guess another comment when it says, do you open and import them? One of the things with when we find, let's use the CDs or USB drives, it's like, hey, I already have some stuff. Can you load it? If they're all similar, it's really easier. But many times with these, we find something, our client finds something, they say, hey, I have this stack of stuff. And we've done projects where a client has, let's say paper scanning, but then they say, I also have these 200 CDs. One of the issues with that sometimes is, opportunities. It's every stumbling block, a stepping stone. No one knows what's on there most of the time. And, if it's, we open one as an example or a kind of a test, we say, okay, it looks like this, here's how it's going to load. We're going to take these, do that. Just like the boxes themselves, no one's ever really sure if everything is consistent. And just doing that research can be costly, or it's, hey, we think it's like this, we're using this one CD or these two CDs as the kind of benchmark, and we'll assume they're all like this. And if they're not, we have to keep stopping, keep testing, keep kind of going back and forth to figure it out. That's a lot of times that is what kind of slows down projects or makes them a little difficult. When clients don't know what's on there, we don't know what's on there, you kind of find stuff along the way. It's absolutely doable most of the time, but it just causes that kind of chunking along instead of a nice, clean, consistent project. That's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
All right, so prep and scanning, instead of talking about it, I'll show you a quick video that we did, and I'm going to mute it because I don't think you'll be able to hear it anyway. And I'll just describe what's going on as we watch. I already muted. I'm going to go to the prep. So as I mentioned, preparation is getting records ready to scan. And here are some, I believe this was actually one of Jim's projects. You can see how I blurred everything out to sensitive materials that we don't want him to see. But these are, I believe, what we call level 3 records. So information that ties to folks. But a lot of stuff here. You'll see one of our operators here going through and prepping it. It's about 15 seconds long. It's all similar, but you'll get an idea of what goes on. So it looks like he's taping right there. He's taking tape, taping something up. Maybe there's a rip or whatever going through. Okay, that's clean, that's clean, that's clean. Great. Next document, got to pull out staples, take away paper clips. Looks like we had some, I think, Jim, these are pat sheets that we were using to indicate a document is now in the next stage, or it's another document flying through, which we'll use to index later. But you can imagine that's about, that's maybe a half a box of records-ish. So around there. But our folks have to sit there and do that for 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 boxes. So just doing that labor to get the files from here to here, remove rubber bands, take the paper clips out, take the staples out, put the pat sheets in if that's part of the scope of work. That takes a lot of time and effort. And that's why preparation is one of the critical components of when we're pricing projects. Anything on prep, Jim, before I go to scanning?
No, sir.
Okay. Visual is always fun because if you have ever prepped a box of paper, you will understand the pain and why paper scanning can be expensive if it's not clean stuff. And actually, to reduce your own costs, we've had clients do their own prep. That can help. With the caveat, even if you do your own preparation, we still will have to go through and double check. It will just be hopefully drastically reduced from, let's say, it takes us an hour to prep a box to, hey, you already did it. Now it took me 10 minutes because, oh yeah, good. You missed one little thing, that's fine. But we will always have to go through it because we're the ones putting it through our scanning machines, and we got to make sure we're not going to put something that was missed or whatever and jam a machine or require maintenance. So we'll always do our own prep, but you can drastically reduce the amount of time that we'll have to spend on it if you prep your own material. Although I'd say 1 out of every 100 clients wants to do that. If Jim could back me up on that one.
Oh yeah, at most, some will attempt it. Sometimes I even encourage it because it's not unusual, or maybe it shouldn't be unexpected that a customer would think a box could be prepped in a half hour to an hour. Standard prep on average documents for a banker's box could be 2 or 3 hours, believe it or not. It just depends upon how carried away maybe somebody got with one of the automatic staplers. But pulling every staple out, if there's multiple staples, it's very time consuming. It's often underestimated by our prospective customer.
Yeah. And we have folks that do this for a living all day, every day, and it still takes a while. Scanning, though, once it is prepped, we go to scanning. So you have to have those clean records to go through. And what's happening here is I'll go back real quick, it's a short section, but this is what we call a high-speed scanner. So our operator has the prep records, she's putting them through the scanner, and she's seeing the images come up here so she can verify that when something comes up, if all of a sudden it's like, it looks like it's halfway cut off, she can stop the process and rescan or find out what the issue is. But it's a visual verification that these records went through cleanly and they were captured. So again, you can see that really quickly here. But once it's prepped, that stuff does go through quickly. That's why you have to have that prep done right. And this, just for fun, well, we talked about large formats. This is a large format scanner. So this is, I sped it up a little bit for the video. It's, maybe 1.5x speed, but again, those are prepped. Sorry, I can't kind of go back a little bit. These have already been prepped, which means either unrolled or unfolded. Sometimes you have to flatten these records to make sure that they're not, bumping around when they're going through, but they're also scanning them, seeing them come on screen, making sure the images did come through cleanly. And then once they're scanned, they're put back, typically rolled up and put back in their original boxes. Anything on scanning, Jim?
No, sir.
All right. And I always mess up moving on to the next slide here if I can. There we go. Yep, that's right. I do have a question real quick. Oh no, excuse me, it was the same one, but for some reason it stayed up there. All right, indexing, which is digitally organizing, digitally naming the files. How do you want that done? Do you want by the box? So you have a box with 2,500 pages in it. Do you just want that, all those images kind of combined and just called box 1, 2,500 page PDF? That's possible. By the folder, by the section within the folder, by even the file or the page itself. Those are all ways to index. And just bring up some of Jim's pictures. By the box would be something like you have either maybe a single PDF called 98_C through D. And then what we typically do is include what we call UID, unique identifying number, to most projects. So in case there's another 98C through D, they don't overwrite each other. So it allows you to see that there were 2 of them. So 98C through D, there's your file. 98D, there's your file. Not as common for people to do box level unless they're really archival, just not access much at all. I think that would be mostly how these usually work, right, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. Box level. I mentioned one that I worked on recently, but most of the time we're going to be under box level, dealing with probably the second and third levels that you see there.
So again, Jim's picture, the folder. So Jim, if you want to describe what you may capture from a folder, I can kind of use my mouse to.
Yeah, absolutely. This particular project has a reference on the folder to a property address. So it's the highest level index value for all the records within it. And then this client is requiring that the documents in each address file be indexed at the document level, meaning there could be 200 documents within the file. Some are 1 page, some are multi-page. The average is 2 or 3 pages. And so we will be capturing the address information from the file folder, and then we will be determining the document type from a list of valid types and examples that they'll provide, and then the date of that document on its cover page. So this is, I think, a good example of one that gets a little bit more into a granular level in terms of filing, because it's important to them that they be able to get to a particular document more quickly.
And even that, just thinking, hey, folder, a section level, let's say, or file level, that can mean different things. We may have a client that says, I want, this folder is called ABC folder, and then within that there's 10 sections, and I want each of those sections captured, like section 1 PDF, 2 PDF, whatever it is. That client may say, I want the folder, the physical folder, to be a digital folder called ABC file. And you open that folder, and then you have the 10 PDFs of the individual files. Another client may say, I don't want that digital folder. I just want all the files. And it may be, call it by that folder title underscore section.pdf. And the next one is the same folder level title underscore next section PDF. So even the same theory of how granular we're getting can be a different project. So indexing is always very important because we're setting up the project to capture what you need, and we're going to apply that to every piece of that project. And there may be exceptions that we need to go over and bring up with you, but that's a critical part of organizing for how you're going to use these later. And then page level, this would be if we were capturing, this is a deed. So typically with deeds or deed books, we'll capture by book and page. So we'll go through and say, this is book 90, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is page 10. This is book 700, page 10. We're actually capturing that page level. But if this was a different type of record, it may be, all right, I need you to capture the date here, the name that says whoever the grantor is or the grantee is down here. And you may have to capture different pieces from different parts of that page. That can get kind of squirrely depending on the consistency. If it's consistent, it's a little easier. It's not consistent, you have to have someone looking around for that information. So page level is the most granular that you can get. All right, schedule. So the timeline for your project, it's in our world, it's dynamic. It's always changing depending on what kind of projects we have in-house, what projects are coming up, which ones are finishing. Did they finish earlier? Are they taking longer? What new stuff's coming in? When does that client need it done? So it's always changing, but we will attempt to give you a pretty solid range of when we think your project could be done. And typically when we give you a price, let's say you're talking with Jim, you say, I have 500 boxes, and what's a quote for that? He'll give you a quote. It's like, oh, it's going to be for fun, $225 a box. That price is going to be based on what we believe is just a standard pacing, which is probably around, considering there are multiple projects always going on, between 50 to 100 boxes per month. That's kind of a general pace. It's not a hard set one, but just early quoting, early estimating. That's just, we're basing this on a normal, nice pace to get your project done. Not too fast, not too slow. If you need a specific turnaround, though, you can let us know, and we will incorporate that into the scope of work. And if that's going to change the price or not. Good example. It's not from it wasn't from paper scanning, but it was a large microfiche scanning project we just finished last month. But we had a project, 400,000 microfiche sheets, and we were working with the client. We said, here's your price based on a 9-month project. They said, okay. Came back about a month later, said, we are required to get this done in 2 months. So we said, okay. We were able to do it. We had to adjust and increase their price to accommodate that. And the reason is not because we could have just, we just want to make more money. We could have done this in 2 months anyway. We actually had to, one of Jim's clients, he had to talk to them, but we actually had to push off and contact multiple clients that were already in projects, already moving along, and say, we're going to push back your project a little bit. Is that okay? And so forth and so on, because we had to dedicate like 95% of our resources to this one project. So it's not that we can't do a project in certain timelines. How does that affect other projects and commitments we've made, and fitting that in? So that's why if you want a quicker turnaround, a faster schedule, it will likely be higher. The price will be higher because of that secondary effect on other projects. On the opposite end, if you have what we call filler work, like I have 1,000 boxes, we say, all right, it's going to be X cost for a 8-month project. You say, you know what, I don't need this. You can, anytime within 2 years, you may get a little bit of a lower price. If we say, okay, so it's filler work. If I start this, I don't need to be done until 24 months from now. So if I want the work, I need the work, I can do it really quickly and just do it fast and get it done. Or I can wait till the end, just do a couple boxes a month until I need to start picking up the pace. If that's okay with you, which we love that kind of work because it allows us to flex with the project based on other commitments that need a faster timeline, you may get a little better price because it allows us that flexibility. Any comments on those, Jim?
That's well said. No, I think you hit that one perfectly.
Thank you. Excellent. Output. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that to come up already, but basically, so getting your files back, getting the delivery of your digital images. There's a traditional method, which is what you're probably thinking about most of the time, which is like a PDF file, a TIFF, a JPEG, something like that. We scan your files, you get PDFs back. That's traditional. That is one method. There's importing to your system, which falls into the traditional area. So if you have an application already set up, like a document management system, you may say, I need TIFFs, but I need you, BMI, to help me prepare these files. So when you get them back to me, they can auto-populate or import into my system. And then the last method is our digital reel application, which I mentioned earlier. We won't go into much detail here, but basically you can import your files or load them into our system once we scan them, and then access them through a secure hosting application just on the web. So those are the three main methods. Jim, if you want to talk about the importing the system and what you see, seems like a lot of the times for how you get those files ready and kind of why that's a little different than just a pure traditional output.
Absolutely. So you'd mentioned that traditional, it's importing to a system's kind of taking traditional to a slightly more complex level in terms of the data deliverables for the project. We can import data. We can deliver that data for import into almost any system. I don't think we've encountered one that we couldn't deliver or format the data for. So essentially what we're doing is taking the image files, which are commonly, TIFF, JPEG, PDF files. Those are going to be the most common image file formats. And we're taking the index values that we've captured for each file or page or box, and we are formatting that data into what is pretty commonly referred to as a load file or an import control file. So it is formatted such that the receiving system is familiar with it and can automatically pull data in and place it in its proper place and complete the index record for that data in a batch manner so that you don't have to touch them one by one. So that's import to system. Laserfiche is a very common platform out there. We deal with it all the time. We have some great expertise on that end, but open text platform, OnBase, those are some examples that we can deliver data into.
And final thing on this slide, it's not necessarily which one do you want. It can be and or both or whatever it is. You may have a system you want to go into, hey, get these files ready for import to my Laserfiche system, but I also want just some basic, not raw, but some basic PDFs in the back end just as a backup. I don't want them formatted necessarily for this. Or we have a lot of clients that when they scan, we may be importing to their system, but they have digital reels of backup for a couple of reasons, features that we have available on our system. Or they may have digital reels of primary, but they're getting those traditional files just for disaster recovery backup on top of our hosted application. So you can kind of do a mix and match. Most of the time, if we know about this when or kind of before the project starts, it's incorporated into the scope of work, it's a much simpler process, and there's not going to be, most of the time, there's not a difference of pricing to do both. The issue becomes when, let's say you want digital reel, done a big project and everything's done. Now you say, hey, guess what? I also want these as TIFFs. We can do that, but now it wasn't part of the process flow, it wasn't how we built out the project. So it's almost like a mini project in itself to get those to you. So if you do want multiple outputs, it's good to know that as early as possible, preferably when we start the project. All right, that is it. Those are the 7 factors that go into the pricing. And you have the baseline and kind of what can increase costs or what can bring costs down, or at least lighten them a little bit. So I'll see if there are any questions. I'll give 15 seconds. If you're writing something here, I'll just wait a second to see if there are any questions that come up. And I already got this one, so that is done. All right, so I don't see any additional questions right now. I'll move to the last slide. If you think of something before we close out here, absolutely type it in. This is just to make it easy. This is my contact information. That's the simple version of my email. You can reach out to me if you have questions. Again, send them to me directly. That's absolutely fine. You can always go to our website, just fill out a form or send something to our general info@bmiimaging.com. We recommend you join our newsletter to keep getting content every other Tuesday. The next one goes out a week from yesterday. So this coming Tuesday, the next newsletter goes out. It includes new articles, videos, upcoming webinars, things of that sort. So recommend you join to kind of keep in touch with the digitization world. But that is it. We thank you for joining and hope you're walking away from here with some information to help you with your paper scanning project. Thank you for joining, Jim. I appreciate your expert insight.
Thank you, Will.
All righty, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your day.